June 4, 1943, Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. The pencil in Unterfritz Werner Burkhart's hand trembled as he wrote into the diary he kept hidden from his own officers. Every sentence he recorded risked punishment and solitary confinement, yet he wrote anyway, driven by a certainty he could no longer ignore: the Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. Moments earlier, the train had slowed, giving Burkhart his first true glimpse beyond Nazi propaganda. Through the window, he watched a sight no German soldier had seen in years: electric lights shining from every farmhouse, illuminating shop windows and street corners, stretching across the Texas plains like a constellation. It was 10 p.m., and America blazed with light. Germany, by contrast, had lived in blackout since 1940. Even before the war, only 1/5 of German farms had electricity. Yet here, in a land Nazi ideology had dismissed as decadent and collapsing, electrical power flowed without limit. As the train came to a halt, 1,850 veterans of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped onto the platform. They expected cattle cars or freight wagons. Instead, they had been transported in Pullman passenger coaches with upholstered seats, dining service, and sleeping berths, comforts many had never experienced even in civilian life. The citizens of Mahia had turned out in full to witness their arrival. They saw only defeated soldiers. They had no idea that this moment would ignite one of the most profound psychological shifts in modern history: a collapse of Nazi ideology not through force, but through overwhelming exposure to American industrial capacity. The numbers that foretold Allied victory were not drawn on battle maps but in statistical realities that would soon shatter every assumption these men had been taught. The collapse had begun 3 weeks earlier, on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, who had succeeded Rommel, surrendered along with 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops. These weren't inexperienced conscripts. They were the most seasoned desert fighters Germany possessed, soldiers who had pushed the British back to Egypt and earned the grudging admiration of Montgomery himself. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of France, twice wounded in North Africa. His diary, later found in the U.S. National Archives, would become one of the most important first-hand accounts of the psychological unraveling of Nazi ideology under American captivity. Radke's journey from certainty to disillusion began in Oran, Algeria, where he and 30,000 other POWs were processed in temporary camps before transport to America. There, long before seeing American soil, their worldview began to crumble. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners each day with a level of organization that outstripped even the Wehrmacht at its peak. Identification was photographed and logged, medical exams completed, inoculations administered, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by officers specifically trained for POW operations. But the first true blow came with the food. Oberstfreiter Hans Mayer, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later, "While we waited for ships at Oran, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda, but no, this was their standard ration." Then came the Liberty ships, the vessels that would carry them across the Atlantic. The prisoners had no idea they were boarding the SS Robert E. Peary, a ship constructed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser shipyards in California. Had they known, they would have dismissed the fact as an impossibility, yet it was true. By the summer of 1943, these ships were returning from supply runs to Europe and carrying up to 30,000 POWs per month back to the United States. The Atlantic crossing delivered the next shock. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division wrote home that the sailors on board discarded more food in a day than his entire company had received in a week during the final African campaign: half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk thrown away. They did not mock us. They simply had so much that waste meant nothing. The prisoners learned, often from friendly American guards, that 2,710 Liberty ships would eventually be produced, each requiring 250,000 parts made in 32 states. The engines were assembled from components produced in 3 different factories, themselves newly built since 1941. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, a Prussian aristocrat, recorded the moment he saw radar rotating atop the ship's bridge as they approached the U.S. coast. "I had believed such technology existed only for our Navy and perhaps the British. To see it on a cargo ship, that was the moment I realized the war was already lost." On August 2, 1943, the prisoners entered Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, and the final remnants of Nazi propaganda collapsed. The base covered 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles. Cranes unloaded dozens of ships at once. In a single day, Norfolk handled more tonnage than Hamburg processed in an entire week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, once a factory worker in the Ruhr, counted 47 cargo ships being loaded or unloaded simultaneously. Cranes lifted loads that would have required teams of men and horses in Germany. Everything ran on electricity, clean, fast, and nearly silent compared to the coal-burning German ports. The march to the waiting trains brought further shock. Parking lots were filled with private automobiles belonging to dockworkers, something unimaginable in Germany, where private car ownership was a privilege of the wealthy. The long-promised Volkswagen had been a fantasy. Fewer than 1,000 were ever delivered. Here, ordinary workers drove to their jobs. But the trains themselves delivered the next psychological earthquake. Not boxcars. Not freight wagons. Not the cramped 40 and 8 cars that hauled German troops across Europe. Instead, Pullman coaches, padded seats that folded into sleeping berths, dining cars with tablecloths, silverware, and wide windows. Radke wrote simply, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." One American sergeant even apologized because the air conditioning in their car was not cooling properly. The Germans were stunned. Air conditioning itself was a luxury they associated only with Hitler's personal train. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to the POW camps of Texas and Oklahoma became the most devastating educational experience they had yet endured. Passing through Virginia, the prisoners pressed against the windows, witnessing an America that, according to Nazi doctrine, should not exist. Towns blazing with electric lights, factories operating night shifts, neon signs glowing in small towns that in Germany would have owned barely a single street lamp. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, all illuminated like cities of the future. Maywer wrote, "Every town had more electricity than all of Hamburg combined." As the Pullman cars rolled deeper into the American interior, the night sky glowed with more light than some of the prisoners had ever seen in their lives. From Virginia into Tennessee and Kentucky, the POWs witnessed what they believed impossible: small towns illuminated like capitals, streets lined with bright signage, factories operating at full capacity in the dead of night. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped briefly for water and coal. The Germans watched in awe as American railway crews executed in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours back home. Automated coal loaders dumped tons of fuel into the locomotive with mechanical precision. Electric pumps filled water tanks without the smoke, soot, or manpower-heavy equipment German rail yards relied upon. Even lubrication of the engines was mechanized, a marvel compared to the hand-applied methods used across the Reich. More unsettling than the machinery was the casual prosperity of the workers. The men wore sturdy leather boots, drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles, and tossed the empties aside without a second thought. Cigarettes were smoked halfway and discarded. To the German soldiers, many of whom had rationed every cigarette since 1941, this was a cultural earthquake. Feldwebel Hinrichmuller, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, quietly calculated that the lights burning in the rail yard for that single hour consumed more electricity than his entire Berlin district used in a day. "The waste was magnificent," he wrote. Empty buildings had lights burning. Electric fans ran in rooms without occupants. It was the carelessness of infinite resource. As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the scale of American industrial might became even more surreal. Factory complexes stretched across the horizon, vast structures dwarfing anything Germany possessed. Near Knoxville, the prisoners saw the colossal Alcoa aluminum plant, its electric furnaces devouring 175,000 kilowatts of power, more electricity than the entire city of Munich consumed. The plant sprawled for nearly 3 miles along the river, glowing with the brilliance of non-stop production. Further north, as the trains slowed near Louisville, the POWs passed the newly constructed Rubber Town complex, a cluster of 4 synthetic rubber plants built in an astonishing 18 months. Each facility employed thousands, and together they produced 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. 4 prisoners like Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, the sight was devastating. Germany had pioneered the synthetic rubber process, yet they had never managed more than 120,000 tons a year even under wartime pressure. Here, 4 American plants exceeded German national production several times over. Hoffmann later recalled, each one of these facilities, with their distillation columns and catalytic crackers, surpassed anything we had built. And there were 4 of them in one place. They told us dozens more existed across the country. The next revelation came as the trains reached Michigan. Far on the horizon, visible even from the rail line, stood the mammoth Willow Run plant, the Ford facility that had redefined industrial mass production. Built in just 9 months, it used 2.5 million square feet of floor space and employed 42,000 workers. At peak production, it produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Hauptmann Verli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, counted 17 B-24s under construction as the train rolled past. He wrote, "We had been told American aircraft were crude and poorly built. But I could see the precision, the order, the speed. These were not inferior planes. They were built faster than we could comprehend." By the time the trains reached Missouri, the ideological collapse was well underway. Crossing the Mississippi on the Eads Bridge, the prisoners looked down at barges carrying more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. Grain elevators rose along both banks, silos so massive they stunned even the most stoic veterans. Unterarzt Karl Schmidt, son of a Bavarian farmer, recorded, "They transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without fear of loss. I watched a barge being loaded with enough wheat to feed my village for 5 years." The journey continued into Kansas City, where massive stockyards held tens of thousands of cattle waiting for slaughter. The smell of meatpacking plants hung in the air. German soldiers who had survived for weeks on 200 grams of meat per week watched American workers eat thick beef sandwiches on their lunch break. Gefreiter Paul Fischer wrote, "They ate meat as we ate bread. No, they ate meat as we wished we could eat bread." At the station, an American guard casually bought hamburgers for several prisoners, meat, cheese, fresh vegetables on soft white bread, paying for 20 sandwiches with a single dollar bill. It was not generosity meant to impress. It was simply normal life in a country of abundance. When the prisoners finally reached the camps in Texas and Oklahoma, they were stunned again. Facilities like Camp Hearn had been constructed in 4 months yet offered better living conditions than many German civilian homes. Wooden barracks with electricity, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heating. The camp hospital astonished German medical officers. Equipped with X-ray machines, well-stocked pharmacies, surgical instruments, and, most shocking, penicillin, it surpassed many German hospitals starving under Allied bombing and supply collapse. Oberstleutnant Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, wrote, "They used penicillin freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. In Germany, men died for lack of sulfonamide drugs. Here, the enemy gave us their most advanced medicines without hesitation." Even the kitchens showcased the abundance of American life. POWs assigned to cooking duties discovered walk-in refrigerators, gas ranges, and automated dishwashers. Food rations included fresh vegetables, milk, eggs, meat, and soft white bread, luxuries German civilians had not seen in years. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, confessed in his diary, "We threw away more food today than my family has seen in 3 years. It was not spoiled. It was simply excess." Regulations required preparing 10% more than needed. By late summer 1943, psychological demolition was well underway. But the most profound revelations were still to come as POW labor programs sent Germans into the American heartland, where they would witness the full, unrestrained force of U.S. agricultural and industrial power. By September 1943, the United States faced severe labor shortages in agriculture and non-military industries. German POWs, protected under the Geneva Convention, were authorized for civilian labor that did not directly support weapon manufacturing. What the U.S. government did not anticipate was that these work programs would become one of the most powerful tools in dismantling Nazi ideology. Every day, trucks carried groups of German prisoners deep into the American countryside, without blindfolds, without restricted viewing, without carefully curated propaganda displays. The prisoners were permitted to see everything in the American heartland, and what they saw would forever transform them. At a cotton gin near Houston, Texas, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang watched, speechless, as a single machine devoured raw cotton and separated it at a pace no village in Germany could have matched. Powered by electricity from the massive Colorado River Authority, the gin handled in 1 hour what Lang's entire Bavarian village processed in 1 month. Lang wrote, "The farmer who owned this machine was nobody special, not nobility, not party elite, simply a farmer. Yet he had running water, electricity, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including Negroes, ate lunches larger than the weekly rations of German workers. And this was normal. Every farm we saw was the same." In Nebraska, German POWs were assigned to sugar beet fields. There they witnessed another revelation: American agricultural mechanization. A single combine harvester, they learned, performed the work of 100 men. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working outside Scottsbluff, wrote, "A 16-year-old boy drove a tractor worth more than everything my father earned in his lifetime. When I told him this, he laughed and said it wasn't even a good tractor. His father was waiting for a newer model from John Deere." More devastating still were the industrial worksites. The Geneva Convention prohibited POWs from directly contributing to war materials, but they could work in industries that freed American citizens for war production. This loophole granted German POWs an unprecedented look inside America's civilian manufacturing giants. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched automated production lines processing more tomatoes in a single day than German plants managed in a month. The line was operated almost entirely by women and elderly men, the younger workers having joined the military, yet output exceeded German peacetime production levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food plant, wrote, "One elderly woman oversaw controls that would have required 50 men in Germany. She did this while drinking coffee and listening to a radio. Everything was automated: conveyor belts, steam cookers, filling machines. It was industrial sorcery." Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power station saw the silhouettes of the sprawling River Rouge plant, the industrial colossus employing 100,000 workers. It produced jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks, consuming 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. Oberschreider Franz Kellner wrote, "The workers drove to the factory in thousands of personal cars. Even our officers could not dream of such luxury. When we laughed in disbelief, the guard told us many workers owned 2 cars, one for work and one for family. We thought he was mocking us." By late 1943, this relentless exposure to American abundance began producing what U.S. intelligence officers described as ideological collapse syndrome. The Office of the Provost Marshal General documented rising requests by prisoners for American books, newspapers, and educational materials. Major Paul Noel N. reported, "The prisoners no longer contest American production statistics. They have seen with their own eyes. Even the most committed Nazis no longer speak of victory. They ask questions about democracy, industry, and economic systems instead." The POW newspapers, especially Der Ruff, printed at Fort Kearny, began shifting from nationalist rhetoric to discussions of democracy, free markets, and Reconstruction. The editors, all anti-Nazi Germans chosen by the U.S., noted that prisoners were increasingly receptive to new ideas. Lieutenant Hermann Gutz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, wrote, "We were told America was weak, divided, ruled by Jews, incapable of strength. Every day here proves the opposite. This nation is more powerful and united than anything we imagined. We were told fairy tales by criminals. Yet nothing undermined Nazi ideology more than the treatment of the Italians, the prisoners who became America's allies after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Those who cooperated were given better housing, more pay, and more freedom of movement. German POWs watched in disbelief as Italian units rode American buses, worked alongside Americans, and even visited local towns. Hauptmann Friedrich Schultz wrote bitterly, "The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated with respect. They dine in American restaurants. They earn money. Some are even dating American women. The Americans show no hatred, only fairness." This was not propaganda. It was proof of democracy. Then came Christmas 1943, the emotional breaking point. American churches, civic groups, and families sent 500,000 Christmas packages, not to U.S. soldiers, but to German POWs. Cookies, candy, games, cigarettes, toiletries. In Texas, a Methodist choir performed carols in German. Boy Scouts delivered handmade cards. Women from the town sent baked goods. Feldwebel Hans Albers wrote, "They gave us gifts after we tried to kill their sons. They gave us kindness instead of hatred. No Nazi speech prepared us for this." The Christmas meal, turkey, ham, pies, ice cream, stunned every man in the camp. It was more food than German civilians had seen since before the First World War. Hans Albers added, "We ate better as prisoners than our generals ate in Germany." And the guards told us, this was a normal American Christmas. Every family ate like this. By the end of 1943, the ideological foundations of Nazism were crumbling under the weight of everything the prisoners had witnessed. American power, American wealth, American technology, and, most disarming of all, American humanity. As 1944 dawned, German POWs found themselves assigned to an ever-expanding range of labor programs across the United States. What the American government intended merely as a solution to labor shortages became, unintentionally, a full-scale demolition of Nazi ideology. Every assignment, every worksite, every glimpse of American industry pushed the prisoners further away from the worldview they had once embraced. In early spring, groups of prisoners were sent to canneries, mills, lumber yards, and fabrication plants, industries that indirectly supported the war by freeing American workers for military production. Under Geneva Convention protections, POWs could not build weapons, but they could handle materials that supported the civilian economy. This technicality exposed them to factories operating not at wartime rationing levels, but at full prosperity. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, German prisoners unloaded steel destined for landing craft. They watched as the plant, staffed by tens of thousands, including women and African American workers, assembled 700 boats per month. These vessels required over 20,000 components each, and the factory ran 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, without a pause. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, working near the assembly floor, wrote, "Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy, women welding, Negroes operating machinery, teenagers managing drills, was happening here. And production never stopped." From Louisiana to Ohio, the revelations multiplied. At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners saw blast furnaces producing 10,000 tons of steel per day, more than some entire German regions at peak output. Endless trains carried iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The furnace fires roared day and night, fed by a supply chain of staggering efficiency. Oberstfreiter Paul Hartmann, who had worked at Krupp before the war, wrote in shock, "I believed I knew industry. But this was beyond comprehension. They spilled more steel on the floor than we produced." Workers complained about overtime while making quantities we could not achieve with forced labor. By summer 1944, POW labor expanded into the American heartland's agricultural regions: Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, the Dakotas, and California. If American factories shattered German illusions, American farms annihilated them. In Kansas, during the wheat harvest, prisoners watched mechanization on a scale they had never imagined. Combines swept across vast fields, each one harvesting 100 acres per day. Grain elevators towered along the rail lines, holding more wheat than Germany imported in an entire year. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, a farmer from East Prussia, wrote, "One American farmer with machines does the work of 100 German farmers. Their yields are unimaginable, 60 bushels per acre. They could lose half their harvest and still surpass all of Europe." In California's Central Valley, POWs worked in orchards that stretched beyond the horizon. They saw fruit discarded for minor blemishes, oranges and peaches plowed under by tractors to stabilize prices. Gefreiter Otto Schultz wrote, "They destroy food to keep prices stable. Mountains of oranges bulldozed. We begged to send them home. The guards sympathized but said it was impossible. The waste was not arrogance. It was proof of unlimited resources." Then came the psychological earthquake of June 6, 1944, D-Day. News of the Normandy landings reached POW camps within hours. Soon afterward, the camps screened newsreels showing the invasion: 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 troops in the first wave. Artificial harbors, streams of vehicles, mountains of supplies, all delivered across open beaches. German POWs watched in stunned silence. There was no propaganda here. Only film of an industrial giant unleashing its full power. Major Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "We saw Germany being crushed not by superior strategy, but by a nation whose resources were without limit. We had sent horses against their trucks, courage against their machinery, fantasy against their reality." Throughout 1944, the prisoners also experienced something no Nazi ideology had prepared them for: American humanity. Despite being enemy soldiers, despite the ongoing war, German POWs were treated with dignity and fairness. Camp commanders delivered condolences when prisoners' relatives died. American churches sent food to German families suffering under Allied bombing. Communities collected clothing and gifts for POWs. When Lieutenant Paul Fischer's wife wrote that she could barely feed their children, American church groups sent food packages to Germany, enemy civilians inside a nation still being bombed. Hauptmann Otto summarized it simply: "They said they fought Hitler, not Germans. We believed it was a slogan. But their actions proved it was truth." The medical treatment was equally transformative. German doctors were allowed to work alongside American physicians, learning techniques unavailable in the Reich. Camp hospitals performed operations, treated trauma, and even provided mental health care, unheard of in the Wehrmacht. Dr. Friedrich Bauer wrote, "They treated suicide attempts with compassion, not punishment. They gave therapy to the broken. It was as though we had stepped out of war and into civilization." By autumn 1944, thousands of POWs were requesting enrollment in education programs. English classes, mathematics, American history, economics, and even correspondence courses from the University of Chicago and special lectures from Stanford University. Prisoners who had arrived as fanatics now debated constitutional law and democratic governance. They read American newspapers freely, marveling at a society where criticism of government was not treason but patriotism. As one prisoner wrote in the camp newspaper, "In Germany, truth was death. Here, truth is duty." The ideological collapse was accelerating, but the most devastating revelations were still to come. By early 1945, the transformation underway inside the POW camps had become unmistakable. The Special Projects Division, originally designed as a cautious re-education effort, found itself overwhelmed by the enthusiasm of tens of thousands of prisoners who now sought instruction in democracy, economics, science, and American governance. Over 40,000 POWs enrolled in formal classes. English language training filled barracks across dozens of camps. Others attended vocational programs, learning carpentry, machinery repair, agriculture, or bookkeeping. Thousands more signed up for correspondence courses provided by the University of Chicago, while Stanford University sent professors to teach lectures on constitutional law, political theory, and economics. For German intellectuals, the exposure to American academia was a revelation. Hauptmann Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, formerly of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended physics lectures at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees whom our nation had driven out, taught us without hatred. Their generosity broke through every barrier of ideology. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge even with their captors. The camp libraries grew rapidly, filled with American newspapers, novels, scientific texts, and political writings. German prisoners encountered open debate for the first time in their lives. They saw newspapers that criticized the president, denounced government failures, and argued across ideological lines, all without censorship, arrest, or fear. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote after reading several newspapers, "They hide nothing, not crime, not poverty, not corruption. And yet this honesty makes them stronger. In Germany, truth is treason. Here, truth is a civic duty." The film screenings had a similar effect. Camps showed Gone with the Wind, The Grapes of Wrath, and other Hollywood films. POWs were stunned by the willingness of Americans to portray their own failures and tragedies. One prisoner wrote in Der Ruff, "Nations that show their wounds do not fear collapse. They fear only lies. That is their strength." But the most devastating ideological blow came not from American abundance, but from German crimes. As U.S. forces liberated concentration camps in early 1945, the footage reached POW camps within days. At first, many refused to believe it, claiming American fabrication. But the evidence mounted: captured German documents, testimony from American soldiers, eyewitness accounts, and finally letters from home confirming the camp's existence. For many prisoners, the moral foundation of their worldview collapsed entirely. Hauptmann Walter Schmidt wrote, "We believed we were warriors of a superior civilization. Now we see we were tools of criminals. We thought we carried culture. Instead, we carried death. American humanity stands in judgment over us." By spring 1945, prisoners had begun preparing for repatriation. Their camps had become training centers for post-war reconstruction. They learned American agricultural practices, industrial organization, and civic principles. American officials explained the coming Marshall Plan months before it was publicly announced. Ost Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "They prepared us not for defeat, but for rebuilding. The victors gave us knowledge, dignity, and hope." It was incomprehensible to men shaped by Nazi vengeance. As the war ended in May 1945, German POWs returned to a homeland in ruins. But they carried with them the lessons of their captivity and the seeds of a democratic future. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 POWs were repatriated. Their impact on Germany was immediate. Many former POWs rose to major roles in the reconstruction of the Federal Republic. Hans Kroll, once held at Camp Shelby, later became West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught classes inside his POW camp, became the first president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Marx, imprisoned at Camp Herne, later served as Germany's permanent representative to the United Nations. Eduard Ackermann, trained in agricultural modern methods in a POW camp, became a leader in West German agricultural reform. The foundations of the German Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950s, had been laid, in part, within the American POW camps where German soldiers learned the mechanics of democracy and free market prosperity. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, more than 500 former German prisoners returned to Texas for a reunion in Austin. Many brought their children to show them where the transformation began. At the reunion, former Obergefreiter Hans Wehe, later a physician in Maine, spoke about his first months in captivity. "We discovered running water, central heating, and food we had never imagined. But more than that, we discovered dignity. The country that defeated us restored our humanity." Then Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Meer described his time working on Iowa farms. "The farmers treated us as young men far from home, not enemies. They shared their meals, their knowledge, even their homes. That kindness changed us forever." Finally, Oberst Hermann Gutz, 78 years old, delivered the speech that captured the meaning of their transformation. "We came to America as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as Democrats. America's greatest weapon was not its tanks or bombs, but its example, the prosperity of a free society, the humanity of a confident people. We returned determined to build a Germany that created rather than destroyed. The auditorium erupted into a standing ovation, Americans and Germans together, former enemies united by a transformation neither side could have imagined when the first POW trains rolled into Texas in 1943. The scale of the German POW system in the United States was unprecedented in world history. Spread across 45 states, more than 500 camps, including 175 main camps and 325 branch labor camps, had been constructed with remarkable speed. Some facilities housed 250 prisoners, others held over 12,000. Most were built in under 90 days, a testament to the same industrial energy that had stunned German prisoners from the moment they arrived. By war's end, the United States housed 371,683 German POWs, part of a broader total of 425,871 Axis prisoners under American control. In 1943 alone, camps received nearly 20,000 prisoners each month. After D-Day, that number climbed to 30,000, and in the final months of the war up to 60,000 prisoners arrived monthly. The labor these POWs provided became crucial to the American home front. Prisoners filled shortages across 46 states, contributing over 14 million man-days of agricultural work, processing 100 million board feet of lumber, and generating the equivalent of $230 million in labor value, at a cost of just 80 cents per prisoner per day. American farmers, factory owners, and local communities grew accustomed to the presence of POW labor crews, many of whom formed lifelong friendships with civilians they met during their assignments. Escape attempts were vanishingly rare. Only 2,222 attempts occurred across the entire system, 0.6% of the POW population, and none succeeded permanently. No American civilian was harmed by an escaped POW. Prisoners often joked that the U.S. was too comfortable to flee from. The success of the educational programs was equally astounding. More than 40,000 prisoners enrolled in courses. 135 POW newspapers were published. Over 30,000 took English classes, 15,000 attended vocational training, and 8,000 participated in university-level correspondence courses. The breadth of instruction, history, economics, mathematics, agriculture, political theory, created a generation of Germans uniquely equipped to rebuild their country. After repatriation, approximately 5,000 former POWs immigrated permanently to the United States. More than 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families for decades, an average letter exchange lasting 31 years. Thousands more returned as tourists, businessmen, or diplomatic officials. American authorities measured the POW program's success through post-war interviews. 95% of the returned prisoners rated their treatment as good or excellent. 74% said captivity had profoundly changed their worldview. Fewer than 10% still held strong Nazi beliefs by 1945. Historians later called the American POW system one of the most successful democratic re-education efforts in modern history, notable not because it relied on propaganda or coercion, but because it relied on reality. One historian summarized it simply: the United States defeated Nazism not only with arms, but with abundance. The physical and emotional journey of the German POWs had begun aboard trains rolling into Mexia, Texas, in June 1943. Those men had arrived expecting to meet a weak, divided, impoverished America. Instead, they encountered a nation of overwhelming industrial power, vast resources, functioning democracy, and surprising humanity. Their transformation reshaped not only their own lives but also their homeland. They returned to Germany as eyewitnesses to the advantages of freedom. Their influence helped shape the emerging Federal Republic of Germany, embedding principles of democracy, economic freedom, and civic responsibility. Many would later testify that the seeds of the German economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, lay not in Marshall Plan money alone, but in the ideas they had carried home from American camps, ideas born from observation, not indoctrination. Former POWs rose to positions of leadership across West German industry, academia, politics, diplomacy, and agriculture. Their understanding of American methods helped modernize German farming, expand industrial efficiency, encourage democratic governance, and support transatlantic alliances. In this way, the POW camps of America became unexpected laboratories for the reconstruction of a nation shattered by dictatorship and war. Looking back decades later, many former POWs describe the experience as both humbling and liberating. They had entered captivity as soldiers of the Third Reich, hardened by propaganda and shaped by totalitarian ideology. They left as men who had witnessed another world, one where prosperity rose from freedom, strength grew from cooperation, and dignity was extended even to enemies. The story of German POWs in America is ultimately a story of transformation through truth. Not the truth written in slogans or shouted in rallies, but the truth visible in electric lights burning across Texas fields, in factories producing wonders at impossible scale, in overflowing grain elevators, in the meals served to prisoners, and in the compassion shown to defeated enemies. As one former POW stated at the 1985 reunion, America's greatest weapon was not its army. It was its example. We came as conquerors. We left as students. Their journey stands as one of the most remarkable stories of redemption, influence, and democratic rebirth in modern history, a quiet victory that reshaped a continent through the simple, overwhelming power of human dignity and industrial might.